Hi, I'm Stuart Malina, and today I'll be talking about the music on Greenwich Symphony Orchestra's programs on November 11th and 12th at the Performing Arts Center at Greenwich High School. The program features 4 different works. 2 of them are for cello and orchestra. We'll get to those in a little bit. But we open the program with a very beautiful piece by Richard Wagner. Most of the time when people think about Wagner's music, they think about bombast and huge orchestras and the Ride of the Valkyries and the Entry to Valhalla and all of these wonderful works from the Ring cycle that he wrote, which was, of course, his magnum opus for tremendously long operas telling Norse mythology stories. But the piece we're going to play is called the Siegfried Idyll, and it's, well, I would say probably, if not definitely, the most intimate of the pieces that Wagner wrote in his entire career as a composer. The story behind this piece is a little bit sordid, so prepare yourself. This is a PG story. Cosima Liszt was the daughter of the great pianist Franz Liszt, and she married Hans von Bülow, who was a great pianist and conductor of his day. There was a famous weekend where Wagner spent the weekend with Cosima and Hans von Bülow, and the 2 of them had an affair, which produced a daughter, Isolde. Isolde could not be claimed by Wagner because he was afraid of the scandal, and so he chose instead to serve as godfather for his daughter. And Hans von Bülow, begrudgingly, I suppose, or perhaps not, agreed to raise the child as his own. I think he was known to have said that had it been anyone less of a genius than Wagner, he wouldn't have done it, but he appreciated Wagner's gift. I guess he understood the situation. 2 children later, finally Cosima divorced Hans von Bülow and married Richard Wagner, and they had a child in marriage, and this child was named Siegfried. Siegfried was named after the hero of the Ring cycle stories. Siegfried is the great hero who rescues Brunhilde from her punishment of being surrounded by fire, and only the greatest hero in the world could break through the fire and rescue Brunhilde, and the 2 of them would be in love and save the world. And so, moving a little bit forward, the birth of Siegfried happened in 1870, and during that year, Wagner created this work called Siegfried Idyll, and it was intended as a birthday gift for his wife Cosima to celebrate their love and also the birth of their son. It was presented by a very small group in their home on Christmas of that year. Cosima's birthday was the day before, but they generally celebrated her birthday on Christmas. And so she was awakened that morning by a group of musicians performing this beautiful new piece for her. Now, it's taken from themes from the Ring operas. The Ring operas are based on what are called leitmotifs, which are little snippets of music representing different elements of the story. They can be characters, they can be emotions, they can be objects. There's one for the sword, has its own leitmotif. And Wagner uses several of these leitmotifs from the opera Siegfried, which he was working on at the time, the 3rd of the Ring operas, and included them in this piece. In particular, the music comes from 2 places. One is the love duet at the end of the opera when Siegfried has rescued Brunhilde. The 2 of them fall deeply in love with each other. And that is the section of music where we get the opening of this piece. This is the opening of the Siegfried Idyll. Now again, it's for a very small orchestra, probably a quarter, if not less, of the size of winds and brasses that you would get in any of the Ring operas. And I think this was because of practicality. He wanted it to be able to be performed in his home. And so it suddenly immediately sets this very intimate feeling. It's very beautiful. The leitmotif is this. And this again is the theme of their love for each other. So here is the opening. It's very beautiful, and the entire opening section of this piece develops this theme, this leitmotif. There, of course, is lots of other music. It's extremely lyrical. It's extremely romantic, meaning of the 19th century ethos of emotional music. And the harmony is similar to what he was writing for Siegfried and for Tristan and Isolde, with lots of surprises that come harmonically, extremely warm harmonies. And so he fully develops this theme, builds into several emotional climaxes. The second theme that I'd like to talk about actually comes from a lullaby. Now, this again is a piece celebrating the birth of his son. His son was a baby, and so it was only appropriate for him to include this beautiful German lullaby. And you hear it first in the oboe, and this is what that theme sounds like. Hold on, can I find it? Here it is. Sorry, let's try that again. Certainly would recognize this as a lullaby theme, kind of a little, maybe an in-joke or just a moment of tenderness, including this traditional lullaby. This will conclude the opening section. He'll bring back the opening motives again. And then he introduces an extended middle section of the piece with an augmented chord. An augmented chord is an ambiguous chord, whereas a major chord is made up of a major third, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps, and a minor third, which is 1, 2, 3 half steps. So again, a major third and a minor third. A minor chord is the opposite. A minor third, 3 half steps, and a major third, 4. These are chords that are very settled in tonality. You know what they are. This is a C major chord. This is a C minor chord. An augmented chord is 2 major thirds. There's your major third. Here's another. Now, this is an ambiguous chord, and it's a very handy chord if you want to move around harmonically, because it can be a C chord, but because the intervals are equidistant, it can also be an E augmented chord, or it can be an A flat augmented chord. And just to give you an idea of the places these chords can resolve, you can have a C resolving to F. That works well, but let's say we call it an E. It can resolve to an A. And if you do it in the third iteration, an A flat augmented chord can resolve into a D flat chord. Very lovely. And so you can be in F major for a while, and then you can easily get around into different keys. And so this was very handy for Wagner. He used it a lot in his operas, and it's nothing magical. It's just a clever little trick that I think Liszt was the first to really do a lot of this. He was called the first chromatic composer, and chromatic music is music that moves around in these kinds of ways. And so the chord that we get is an E flat augmented chord, and then we have a beautiful little theme. And this will be the theme of this longer second section. And this is a little bit of a wandering section, meaning that the music moves around in ways that are fairly repetitive and yet always a little bit different. So it's constantly changing, sometimes changing harmonically, sometimes changing in terms of dynamics, but always keeping your attention because of the changes. And sometimes it'll change in terms of orchestration. So there's a long section. That section is for woodwinds. Then you'll have a long section for strings. and so forth. And this will go on, and it will build very gradually over several minutes. And then finally, at the climax of this, or like the first climax of this, he changes gears entirely, and we have a French horn solo. Now, the French horn is an important instrument in the story of Siegfried. It is, in fact, the story, the voice of Siegfried's horn. Siegfried plays his horn in the opera several times. There are several long horn calls of just horn solo. And so immediately in this context with the name Siegfried Idyll and this horn solo, we have that association again with the great hero. And this is what this theme sounds like. But he doesn't just give us the horn. He also gives us an answer in the clarinet. And the clarinet, the answers are very reminiscent of music from Siegfried, the music of the voice of the bird. There are several dialogues towards the end of Siegfried before he finds Brunhilde, where the bird is singing, and the bird first has no voice, and then suddenly the bird has voice and sings words. He can understand the words of the bird. And the bird says, "You are the great hero, you're going to get Brunhilde, you're going to save the world." He tells Siegfried all of these things that are going to happen. And Wagner uses the contour of the bird call from Siegfried to create the answer to the horn call. This is what it sounds like at this point. Again, the horn. These are the sounds of the bird call from Siegfried. This will build again, it'll build again, and then he brings everything together, and you have the opening theme with the second theme, the one that begins with the augmented chord, playing together, and it sounds like this. Oh goodness, I'm probably not going to be able to do this. So this is a common compositional technique where you have two themes. You combine the two themes at a moment of climax, but this climax will build even further until finally the trumpet comes in. And the trumpet only plays, about 16 measures in this entire piece. But it's a very big moment because finally you get the bird call from Siegfried in its entirety. And this is what it sounds like. Again, this is the bird saying, "This is the great hero." It's a moment of great triumph in this piece, but it's not the end of the piece. Rather, it's a climax that then has a denouement. And the denouement brings us back to the tenderness and intimacy of the opening section. This is truly a delightful piece of music. I like Wagner's music of all sorts. I've seen several entire ring cycles. It's incredibly stirring music. I love Tristan and Isolde. But this music is just something completely different. People have said many things about Wagner's personality. He was a tyrant, he was an egotist, he was a narcissist. But this is certainly the other side of Wagner. This is Wagner, the family man, the devoted husband, the adoring father, Wagner with a song in his heart. And I think it will make a lovely opening to this concert. As I said a moment ago, the second and third pieces on our program are both pieces for cello and orchestra. The first of these is a piece by Jessie Montgomery. Jessie Montgomery is I would say a rising star, but a risen star in the world of composition right now. An African-American composer who has written many incredibly wonderful works, both for full orchestra, for chamber music. She herself, I believe, is a violist. She writes string music extremely beautifully. I've done several pieces of hers for string orchestra. This is a piece that is written for solo cello with string orchestra, I would say accompanying, but in collaboration with the cellist. It's called Divided, It was written just about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and it was written for Tommy Mesa, the cellist who we are going to be presenting in a performance at Carnegie Hall by the Sphinx virtuosi. Sphinx is an organization that has emerged very strongly over the last decade or so, and their entire purpose is to bring more underrepresented people into the world of classical music. And they've supported many Latino, Latina, Latinx, African-American performers as they've embarked on very successful careers. And Tommy Mesa is one of the people who has come through the Sphinx organization, as has Jesse Montgomery. And so it's wonderful that we're able to perform this piece with the person for whom it was written. Tommy is an extraordinary young musician, and I think you're going to enjoy his performance. Now, I thought instead of trying to extemporize my feelings about this piece, I would first read what she herself wrote about this piece, because I think it's very poignant. She said, "Divided for solo cello and orchestra is a response to the social and political unrest that has plagued our generation in the recent past, specifically the sense of helplessness that people seem to feel amidst a world of that seems to be in constant crisis, whether it is over racial injustice, sexual or religious discrimination, greed and poverty, or climate change. In a world that is so fast-paced, where all of these desperate realities have been unveiled by the internet with constant visual bombardment to the human psyche, how do we regain control and find beauty among the chaos? How can we stack good actions over the negative reactions that easily emerge out of conflict? The cello is a voice crying out to be heard, in chorus with a few passionate and unrelenting, with the orchestra performing a gritty accompaniment." So this is a piece that is a reaction to what's going on in our world. And let's face it, the world right now is a very complicated and in many ways a very difficult and ugly place. There are sparks of light that emerge, but in general, it's become a tough terrain to navigate for many people. And so this is a piece that is in fact a crying out by the cello amidst a world of chaos. And I think she presents this extremely compellingly. In terms of musical ways that she brings this about, she opens the piece with a cello solo, and this establishes a intervallic struggle, let's say, between a half step and a whole step. So you'll hear the cello in a very high range, extremely plaintively playing various intervals. So there's your half step, there's your whole step, and then it comes back down in half steps. And then starts rising. Again, a whole step, again, half steps, and then a rising half step. So in other words, she's taking this interval of the half step and the whole step, creating a conflict between them and creating a beautiful melody that weaves them together. Again, in a very ambiguous way, but a very expressive way, and in a range of the cello that is extraordinarily plaintive and expressive. This opening section feels much more like a rhapsody. It's very wide open in terms of its compositional technique. Again, the general feeling is expression and sorrow. And then the second half of the piece changes completely, and we have a very quick ostinato, again, ostinato being a repetitive pattern that goes underneath, set by the orchestra, by the underlying strings below the soloist. And this is begun, again, with half steps, but in very fast repetition. So we have a rising half step and a descending half step, all on top of an ostinato single note. The general feeling is one of a murmur, but it's an agitated murmur, and it's ongoing. It never stops. The accompaniment stays nervous pretty much for the entire rest of the piece until the very final section. And I think this really beautifully creates the sense of a world of chaos. And on top of the world of chaos, we have the solo cello playing these long, plaintive, expressive melodies, again, trying to make sense of the underlying chaos, struggling against it. And it gets more and more complicated as the piece progresses. There is an extremely long section, which is quasi-improvisational and then thoroughly improvisational. The quasi-improvisational section is a melody where the direction to the soloist is to play it in whatever expansion and whatever style you wish, but the music is set out. And then after that, there's an open section where the cellist really can freely improvise over all of the concepts that come before. So really every performance is going to be very different from the one before. And I'm very interested to see what Tommy does with these sections. So after this very long section of great agitation, the piece winds down very much towards the end. And we have a very wide open, very lyrical, very high in register for the cello solo, a cadenza. And the cadenza comes to an end and the orchestra joins in unison with the cello, bringing the piece to a close, again, through these half steps, which the cellist is playing. And this is how the ending will sound. So it ends with almost a scream of despair. I think it's an extremely beautiful piece, an extremely expressive piece, and an extremely powerful piece given the times that we're living in. Music has so many different capabilities, and one of them is referring to the world around us. I think the greatest art reflects on what's going on in the world. Not necessarily specifically. I mean, sometimes you get that like with Guernica, but sometimes just like the painting The Scream, where you just have this character with this almost grotesque scream reflecting on the world around him. And this is that kind of piece. Our second piece for cello and orchestra was written about 150 years before Jesse Montgomery wrote Divided. It's a piece that fits squarely in the Romantic period by a French composer named Camille Saint-Säens. Saint-Säens was one of the great Romantic composers of France. He lived a very, very long life, and he started composing very early. And his life as a composer had an arc. He started off being considered somewhat of a radical. He was writing in this new modernistic, chromatic, what we just talked about, chromatic harmonic world. People considered him a little bit too much of a Wagnerite to be a French composer. But there's always beautiful lyricism in his music, this beautiful long lyrical line that's typical of French music. Saint-Säens himself considered himself a member of this tradition, this Germanic tradition, and it was something that he struggled against in terms of his identity. So he started off considered a radical. At the end of his career in the early 20th century, he was already being considered a conservative reactionary, reacting to the music of the likes of Igor Stravinsky, who of course wrote The Firebird and Petrushka and The Rite of Spring, bringing music into a very modern language. And Saint-Säens remained very stubbornly in a 19th century style in his later works. This piece was written in 1872, so squarely in the middle of the High Romantic period. And it was a hugely successful piece at its time. And I think part of the reason for that is that people considered this somewhat of a return to his classicism roots rather than the world of modernism, which they thought of his music at the time. It's in 3 movements, but the 3 movements are played without break. They just go one into the next. So it feels like one compact piece with 3 sections. And the other thing to know about this piece is it is cyclical, meaning that you'll have material from the beginning that will return towards the end to help unify the piece and tie it together. The opening of the piece is extremely abrupt. There's no orchestral exposition which sets up a beautiful entrance of the soloist, but rather the piece begins with a boom, and then immediately the cello is off and running with the opening theme, which is the main theme of the entire piece. And it starts with a descending figure made up of fast-moving thirds, that kind of figure, but tied together to have this snaking, descending line, and then a very expressive moment at the end of the figure, which is our favorite interval from the last piece, the half step. So this is what the opening sounds like. So again, you have the descending and rising thirds, and then our half step. So as I said, this is going to be a theme you're going to hear many, many times, not just in the solo instrument, but also in the woodwinds. And this opening section of the first movement feels a little bit stormy because it's a very energetic and very expressive moment, but a different kind of expression from what we have in the Jessie Montgomery piece. This is expression in a romantic vein. And again, I've said it many times, romanticism is not about love in music, but rather romanticism is about the portrayal of deep emotion and humanity in music. It's a departure from the classicism of Mozart and Haydn, which is beautiful music, often extremely expressive, but not designed to portray particular emotions. This is music that is designed to portray passion, or to portray love, or to portray despair, or to portray deep longing. And you get all of these things in this piece. So after a section where he develops that particular theme, we get a second theme. This is very standard, sonata form, first theme followed by a second theme. And the second theme is lyrical and not stormy at all, but extremely, extremely expressive. And this is what that theme sounds like. It's lovely. It's a typical Saint-Säens melody, extremely long in its breadth, extremely expressive, and extremely simple. I would like to mention one harmonic thing that you hear a lot, and that is this diminished chord. So we talked about augmented chords before, two major thirds. If you do the opposite and use minor thirds, you can actually do 4 of them in the course of an octave, and they start again. This is a diminished chord. And a diminished chord has 2 wonderful things. One is that it has intensity and drama. The other is like the augmented chord because it can start there and it keeps cycling over the course of octaves. It's harmonically useful, like the augmented chord is. It can be used as a chord to transpose. So again, you can do that. All of these things are possible and make harmonic sense because there are so many possible uses for each of those minor thirds. But I don't want this to be a harmony lecture. I just wanted to point that out. So in this particular theme, you get it a lot. You have, sorry. There it is. And here it is again. Diminished chord. Here. It's just part of the the language of Romanticism that they use to great effect. So that's probably enough on this first movement. Of course, there's a lot more to it than just those two themes, a lot of virtuosity at the same time. The cello pretty much never stops in this opening movement. Sometimes the cello is the motor playing this quick moving opening motive. Sometimes it's the woodwinds playing the quick motive, and the cello responding to it with long lyrical accompanying lines. The second movement is an interesting one because as stormy as the first movement is and as romantic, the second feels almost like we're suddenly back in the world of classicism. It's a very stately little dance in 3 that's introduced first by the strings. Where does it come from? Well, we had these thirds, and here we have thirds again. So he takes the third, but he creates something different about it. He has it rising rather than falling. It's now in a major key rather than a minor key. And again, it's set in this very stately, almost minuet-like dance. So the orchestra and the soloist alternate in terms of sections. The orchestra plays this beautiful minuet, and then the cello answers with something very lyrical. And then the orchestra answers again. With the cello continuing a lyrical melody on top. So this will go on for a while, and then there will be a short cadenza in the middle, a section where the cello plays alone. The minuet returns, it ends very expressively, and then we return to the motive from the beginning. This time we first hear it in the oboe. So what's the difference? It sounds a little different. It's in major. Rather than the opening, now we're in. And instead of the half step, we now have a whole step. It's just a kind of a nice little twist. We've been in major for a long time, so he brings back the opening theme again in B-flat major, and then we'll transition back into a minor key, and you'll get a lot more of this opening melody, and then things slow down again, and we get a very expressive theme in the cello, a little bit heavy, but kind of song-like. This will continue. So where does this theme come from? It's kind of a reverse of or when it came back in major, but this time it's going down. Can you hear that? And so it's a beautiful variation. It feels a part of what we had earlier, but in some ways completely different. It now has the sense of almost like an opera aria that the cello is playing. This will be answered by dramatic music, and then things get very quick again. I don't want to talk too much more about this piece. It really plays beautifully on its own. It's a rather compact concerto, which makes it a nice pairing with another short piece. But I think that these two works for cello and orchestra really work beautifully as foils for each other, and yet sharing certain similar elements. I hope you'll feel the same way. And this brings us to the Jupiter Symphony, Symphony number 41 of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Boy, I could give an entire course on this piece. It's such a magnificent work. for orchestra. But the thing you need to know before anything is that it was written during one of the unprecedented and perhaps subsequently unmatched periods of time, the summer of 1788. And in this summer, just over the course of a couple of months, Mozart wrote the 39th Symphony in E-flat major, the 40th Symphony in G minor, and the 41st Symphony in C major. It's an extraordinary output of extraordinary music. These are basically considered his greatest symphonic works, churned out one after another. And each of them is so thoroughly different. The E-flat major being lyrical and almost like a spring day. The fourth being a little bit dark, gloomy, agitated. And then the 41st Symphony being triumphant and majestic. And the other extraordinary thing about this summer is that it was an incredibly sad time for his family. He and his wife had lost a daughter that year. And he was facing tremendous financial tribulations. And so the idea that he could write this particular 41st Symphony during that summer, this piece of great majesty, joy, exultation, is truly an amazing accomplishment. That he did it so quickly, what can I say? He was one of the great geniuses of history. Everyone acknowledges that. If there's any indication of how we can prove that, this is how we can prove it. He wrote 3 of the greatest symphonies of all time in the course of 2 months. So what is it that makes this piece great? Well, that's a hard thing to quantify, but you can talk about how he put this piece together. And it's a little bit different from a lot of the music that he wrote. It's in 4 movements, like most of his symphonies. It's in C major, which is not a thoroughly uncommon key for him, but kind of a good choice of key for a piece of this kind. And the first movement, what I think makes this piece so unique is the amount of material that he puts out. The same will be true of the 4th movement, but at the very beginning, the piece begins without an introduction, but kind of the introduction is built into the first theme. The first theme feels like an introduction. It's like a fanfare, a very short fanfare, followed by a lyrical bit, followed by a fanfare, followed by a lyrical bit. This is atypical. Mozart was in his comfort zone when he was writing lyrical music. He considered himself at his best in the world of opera, writing lyrical, singing lines. And this is not really a singable theme. It begins like this with a fanfare, answered by a kind of a lyrical answer. And then, same thing. So we have 2 elements. This kind of martial theme of the main note C, and then a 3-note lead-in. And then this rising theme. And you're going to hear both of these used throughout this movement in various combinations. So, the second time we hear this theme, it's no longer loud. It's very quiet. We have the strings playing, the horns playing just a simple arpeggio, and the woodwinds playing an octave followed by a descending scale. I bring this up because all of those things are going to be used now as his vocabulary for this first piece. You'll hear quite a lot through this piece. So how does he use these things? Well, we'll get it now in a loud section. And then he's going to take the second part of the opening section and expand it. Nothing typical, just extremely beautiful and clever in the way that he's giving us little snippets and then creating something longer and more lyrical out of it. After we come to a cadence, we move on to a second theme, and this is now new material. So what is this made out of? Well, we have a rising line of half steps, and then a nice little tail to it. But this descending figure is the inverse of what we had at the beginning. So again, he's now changing things around, keeping similar material, but shifting it in ways so that it sounds like something brand new, but it really isn't absolutely brand new. The other thing that I love about this is that the theme, again, isn't really your typical lyrical Mozart theme. It's just a 2-measure. It's answered in the lower instruments with this answer. So listen again. Charming, lovely. This will continue on. He returns again to that opening lyrical motive to close up the main body of the first section. And so on and so forth. But then he gives us a new theme for the coda section. The coda is a closing section, and in this piece he gives us a coda theme. Again, very charming, but a little bit unique, the idea of bringing in absolute new material for a closing section. And then he gives us even more new material. And what is this made up of? Well, we had the rising half steps. This is now descending half steps. Again, new twists on an old theme. So he brings it to a close. So the development is going to begin, and for the development, he suddenly shifts harmonic gears. And we're suddenly in E-flat major. In the terms of Saint-Säens in the 1870s, it's not such a dramatic shift. For the 1780s, this is something kind of interesting, that he just suddenly moves to E-flat major, and he begins the development section with the coda theme. So he basically gives us the coda, the thing that ended the first section, to start the next section. And then we have fugal material, meaning, actually fugal's the wrong word, counterpoint, where we have answers from the top and the bottom. I'm not going to play all of this, but what I will tell you is over the course of the development section, he brings us into very strange harmonic places. So we started here, but then we're going to end up in E major, which couldn't really be farther from E-flat major in terms of harmonic progression. And then he's going to be there for a while. We're going to have more dramatic harmonic shifts and sequences of melodies that will change keys. And then we'll find ourselves somehow back. So again, is the overall arc of the harmony of this development section. Quite extraordinary. Enough on the first movement. The second movement is, in a sense, a typical Mozart lyrical andante second movement. It begins with a very beautiful melody in the strings, answered by punctuation chords with the whole orchestra. so it leads into very lovely music. Again, not atypical of Mozart, extremely lyrical, right out of the world of his operas, singable and extremely lovely. What is interesting about this piece is the emotional depths to which it will eventually reach. And here you could say you might be hearing the underpinnings of the sorrow of this time in his life. I'm not sure that he really thought in those terms when he was writing music. It wasn't part of what composers did to say this is going to be the sad part, but it certainly becomes extremely dramatic. So we suddenly go into a minor key, C minor, and we have this extremely emotional, extremely painful music. I will play one other section from this particular part of the second movement, and that's where he goes into what we call hemiola, and I might have talked about that in some of the previous lectures I've done, but hemiola is the redivision of 2 measures of 3 beats into 3 measures of 2 beats. So in this case, it would be 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, transformed into 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2. 6 beats in both cases, but listen to what it sounds like. So again, I'm gonna start a little bit before so you can hear that second theme and the way it goes into the hemiola bit. Could you hear that? How it suddenly goes into 2-note phrases rather than the 3-note phrases. And then finally we have another beautiful lyrical theme in C major from the C minor section. It almost feels again like a breath of fresh air or a beam of sunlight through the clouds. Two things are interesting here. One is, again, this use of the descending half step. And the other is hemiola, where instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, we now have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. This hemiola, this redivision of the pulse from 3s to 2s. An extraordinary movement in an extraordinary piece. The third movement, I suppose, is the most typical in terms of what you'd find in a classical symphony. It is a minuet. It is delightful, and like all minuets, it's in an A-B-A form. You have the minuet section, the opening section, 2 halves of that section, both repeated. Then you have a trio section, also in 2 halves that are repeated. And then you return to the A section and play that one more time before the piece ends. In this particular case, it's a delightful theme, again, built around a descending chromatic scale, half steps. It's all built around. So again, he's using things that he's used, and this is what holds the piece together. It isn't a cyclical piece like the Saint-Säens, where you have that opening theme actually returning in its original form in a later movement. But here you have little elements, little intervals, little musical ideas that do return to hold the piece together. The trio section is an interesting one. How can I best explain this? It begins with a cadence. A cadence usually ends a piece. That would be the end of a piece. But this trio begins like that. And then you follow with a little ditty. Interesting, isn't it? And again, he uses the contour of the opening melody of the trio to set this little ditty answer to the cadence. It's a little variation on that descending chromatic scale. The second half of the trio is important. And the reason it's important is because it gives us yet a new motive, and this motive is going to be the main motive of the last movement. Or, in the last movement, we get... So he's kind of giving us a hint of what's to come in this very dramatic part of the trio. Well, let's leave the minuet and go on to the final movement. Some people have said that this is the greatest achievement in classical counterpoint in the history of music. I don't know if I can go that far. I don't know the complete canon of classical music, but what I can say is that this is pretty cool contrapuntal writing. Certainly when we get to the end of this movement and we have a crazy double fugue of multiple motives that we've gotten throughout the course of this movement, it's really extraordinary that Mozart was able to craft this so that it doesn't even sound like anything crazy special. It just sounds really cool. And it sounds beautiful, but you don't listen to it and say, oh my goodness, what incredible crafting. You listen to it and say, what dazzling music. And then you look more deeply and see what he actually has done. But let me first set up what he does in this last movement. Like the beginning of the first movement, the themes are extremely short snippets of music. So as I said, you have... That's it. That's the theme. And then it's followed with another theme. Mostly that. It's kind of like in terms of the rhythmic contour of it, but this is what it sounds like. And so together, that's how the last movement ends. Then things become dramatic. So what do you hear in the bass? You hear music that's very reminiscent of the very beginning of the piece. Now we get, which is the opposite of that. Again, these are typical classical figures, so it's not crazy that he would use them in both movements, but it's also not accidental that he did. He's intentionally using material from earlier. And so what are the, so then we had, when we get it in forte, and then suddenly everyone's playing. Bum, 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 bum. You're going to get that theme a lot. Now, what comes right after this is yet another little piece of musical material. Sorry, let me do that again. And that is going to be yet another theme. It's just a dotted figure, yum, ba-bam, followed by a scale. He's building an arsenal of material. This builds to a cadential climax, and then we get kind of a mini fugue, a fuguetta, where it begins in the second violins. I'm not going to play too much of it because it becomes very complicated to play on the piano. But the idea is he's already taking this opening melody and making a fugue out of it, meaning different instruments are going to come in at different times with that main theme, and he's going to write beautiful counterpoint on top of it. And then we have yet another motive. This is a rising scale we had. Going down, now it's going up. And he does this in canon with the bass instruments. So again, more material that he can use. Then we get to the second theme. So that's all in the first theme group. Now we have a theme that's again made up of several different parts. One is something that sounds a little bit like the opening theme, kind of, sort of, but not really. It's a different theme. We have an answer to that. And then we have an answer to that, which we had a moment ago. So again, we have then, and then. But on top of that last one, he gives us our descending scale from earlier. It's cool. Again, not typical that you'd have this kind of a segmented theme by Mozart. And yet the way he writes it, even though it's segmented, it sounds somehow like it's lyrical. But it's not at all song-like. And it's not the same kind of lyrical melody that you had in other Mozart symphonies. You might get something like that much more in Beethoven, who kind of specialized in taking little segments and creating large works out of little bits. But again, he's giving us a lot of material, and I don't want to spend tons of time on this because it really plays quite beautifully on its own. We have an amazing development section which uses a number of these themes, but I do want to take you towards the end of this movement. So we come to the main cadence of the second theme, the coda group of the last movement, where you'd think the piece would end, but he gives us an entire section after this. So this is how it ends. Let's see. And then suddenly we get and we're in like C7 chord. That's not the end of a piece. Something else is coming. And he transitions into this final section by taking our opening theme and turning it upside down. And then we have this crazy fugue at the end, where he takes every single one of those short snippets and incorporates them together into one fugal section to bring the piece to an amazing and dazzling close. This is something that only a great genius like Mozart could have pulled off. Maybe Bach could have as well. He was a great contrapuntist, of course. But Mozart, no less than Bach, was able to make quite an amazing fugue. This one with so much different material, and yet it all fits together so seamlessly and beautifully, and not just in the same direction. So you'll have one part that's up in the upper instruments in terms of pitch, and then you'll hear that same part in the lower instrument, and it works in all of these inversions. That is genius. That's great skill, and this is one heck of a symphony. I hope you'll come join us at these concerts. They should be really fantastic. I mean, it's 4 pieces of music that couldn't be more different from one another. And yet I do think they fit together kind of nicely to give us a very satisfying evening or afternoon of music. So hope to see you there, and thank you for watching my lecture.